Hello and welcome back to Books and Things, and welcome back to Favourites Week. Today I'm going to be talking about my top 5 favourite poems. I thought I would do poems rather than poetry collections because I tend to like individual poems more than overall collections, and because a couple of the poems here are Victorian and I haven't read in the collections they were originally published in, if that makes sense. I have 5 poems to talk about today, but unlike the rest of the videos where I ranked all 5 of them, I'm going to rank 4 of them and talk about one of them first. It's not that it's my 5th favourite out of the 4, there are probably others in the 4 I'd prefer it over, but because it is a slightly different poem and a multimedia poem, I thought I would talk about it first as it's quite hard to compare to the other 4, and that poem is Said I by Weena Wonders. Weena is a writer and a fellow booktuber, and one thing she does on her channel, which I really love, is what are effectively multimedia poems. It's spoken word poetry combined with music and film footage, and they are amazing, and my favourite is Said I, and it is one of my favourite poems ever, and I know all the words of it, and I must have watched that video like 100 times. Genuinely. The music and the film footage really adds to the atmosphere as well, but the poem itself is so beautifully written, so engaging, so interesting, so eerie almost, but also really emotional and lovely, and I just think she has such a brilliant way with words. This is the only poem I'm not going to read out because I can't do it justice, and also because I feel like if I read it I would try and read it in like the rhythm Weena does and it would be weird, so I'm just going to leave the link to her video down below, and please really go and watch/listen to that poem because it is really good and genuinely one of my favourite poems ever. At number 4 we have a poem from this collection. This is The Amores by Richard O'Brien, which is published by the Emma Press. It's a small pamphlet but I love it so much. It's absolutely beautiful with really lovely illustrations in, and my favourite poem in here is one of my favourite poems ever, and a poem that I think made me cry the first time I read it, and every time I read it makes me smile but also feel emotional, and that was a poem called Le Man. I think it's really beautiful, and I also love the way that it combines the themes of food and love in a similar way to I think Kitchen by Madani Yoshimoto does, which I talked about yesterday. I think the way this poem explores the domesticity of love and about sort of combining 2 lives together to make a joint life is just really lovely, so I will read it for you because I think it's really beautiful. Le Man. Lover, slumberjack, roll over in your clown pyjamas. Wonder if it's really all from here true comfort comes, from ticket stubs and hotel breakfast deals and cooking meals together. Chop for you and save what's left the way you asked me to. And stock the fridge for you with juice, lemon parfait, 2 kinds of cheese with unfamiliar names, salmon for bagels, share a single plate. The little rituals I assimilate, like washing rice, wearing more red, and sleeping on just one side of the bed. Though sometimes your first night away on yours. So find me in the kitchen where I'll kiss your neck and whisper in your ear how I like the way you dislike things more than I like the way most people like the things they like, and feel like this could be the future. Leaning lightly on your shoulder, cracking jokes about your thermal stockinged legs. I can't believe the way you poach those eggs. At number 3 I have The Convent Threshold by Christina Rossetti. Christina Rossetti is one of my favourite poets and I really love her very much. I studied her when I was doing my A-levels when I was about 16-17, and studying her along with Thomas Hardy, who I'll talk about in a minute, really made me fall in love with poetry in a way I hadn't before. I say that, I still don't read very much poetry. I'd like to read a lot more than I do, and I kind of go through waves where I read lots of poetry and then out of it. And recently, in the last few years, I haven't been reading that much poetry, but Christina Rossetti was one of the poets that got me into poetry. She is a Victorian poet, one I absolutely love, and I think she has a wonderful way with imagery. I think she has a beautiful rhythm, and something really enchanting about her poems and her language, but also something, I almost want to say stressful, that's not what I mean. There's something about the power and rhythm of her poems that makes me read them quickly because they have that kind of force. I don't know if I'm explaining that very well, but I love her poems very much, and The Convent Threshold is absolutely brilliant. Not going to read it all because it is quite a long poem, but it's really engaging. I love the imagery in it, I love the exploration of kind of religion and growing up. It's called The Convent Threshold, and it is about being on a threshold, about to make a decision and considering the past and the future and so on, and I think it's so beautifully written. The Convent Threshold. There's blood between us, love, my love. There's father's blood, there's brother's blood, and blood's a bar I cannot pass. I choose the stairs that mount above, stare after golden skyward, stare to city and to sea of glass. My lily feet are soiled with scarlet mud which tells a tale of hope that was, of guilt that was, of love that shall not yet avail. Alas, my heart, if I could bear, my heart, the self-same stain is there. I seek the sea of glass and fire to wash the spot, to burn the snare. Lo, stairs are meant to lift us higher. Mount with me, mount the kindled stair. Your eyes look earthward. Mine look up. I see the far-off city grand, beyond the hills a watered land, beyond the gulf a gleaming strand of mansions where the righteous sup, who sleep at ease among the trees or wake to sing a cadenced hymn with cherubim and sephirim. They bore the cross, they drained the cup, rack roasted, crushed, wrenched limb from limb. They, the off-scouring of the world, the heaven of starry heavens unfurled, the sun before their faces dim. At number 2 I have Long Distance 2 by Toni Harrison. This was another poem I discovered when I was like 16, 17 and one that I immediately loved so much. I read this in a collection of poetry which was called something like The Nation's Favourite Poems, and I was reading that collection, some of them I liked, some of them I didn't like, and I got to this one and I read it and I wept. As a teenager I knew it off by heart, and after having read that poem I went out and bought sort of the complete poems of Toni Harrison and read them all. I love a lot of his poems, but none of them has ever beaten this one for me because I think it's such a beautiful poem, so powerful and just so wonderfully explores grief. And in fact it is from a collection by Toni Harrison which I think goes so well together. A lot of them are about his relationship with his father and about his father's death, and I think this poem is just so moving. I don't have my Toni Harrison collection with me, so I'll read it from my phone, but still, it's beautiful. Long Distance 2. Though my mother was already 2 years dead, Dad kept her slippers warming by the gas, put hot water bottles her side of the bed, and still went to renew her transport pass. You couldn't just drop in, you had to phone. He'd put you off an hour to give him time to clear away her things and look alone, as though his still raw love was such a crime. He couldn't risk my blight of disbelief, though sure that very soon he'd hear her key scrape in the rusted lock and end his grief. He knew she'd just popped out to get the tea. I believe life ends with death, and that is all. You haven't both gone shopping. Just the same, in my new black leather phone book there's your name, and the disconnected number I still call. I had to do like 4 takes of that last verse because genuinely I kept crying. Anyway. But number 1, what I think is probably my favourite poem of all time, is a poem by Thomas Hardy, and that is called At Castle Botterell. I love Thomas Hardy's poetry. As with Christina Rossetti, I studied him at school and really fell in love with his poetry. I love his novels a lot. An awful lot in fact, but I also think his poems are wonderful and I think he has such a great way with words. My favourite of his poems tend to be from what's called the poems of 1912 to 1913, which are the poems he wrote after the death of his first wife, who he had been estranged from, reflecting on their relationship and her death and so on, and they're absolutely beautiful, really interesting, and my favourite of these is probably this poem, which is called At Castle Botterell. At Castle Botterell. As I drive to the junction of lane and highway, and the drizzle bedrenches the wagonette, I look behind at the fading byway and see on its slope, now glistening wet, distinctly yet, myself and a girlish form benighted. In dry March weather we climb the road behind a chaise. We've just alighted to ease the sturdy pony's load when he sighed and slowed. What we did as we climbed and what we talk of matters not much, nor to what it led, something that life will not be balked of without rude reason till hope is dead and feeling fled. It filled but a minute, but was there ever a time of such quality since or before in that hill story? To one mind, never, though it has been climbed foot swift, foot sore by thousands more. Primeval rocks form the road's steep border, and much have they faced first and last of the transitory in earth's long order, and what they record in colour and cast is that we too passed. And to me, though time's unflinching rigour in mindless rote has ruled from sight the substance now, one phantom figure remains on the slope as when that night saw us alight. I look back and see it there, shrinking. I look back at it amid the rain for the very last time, for my sand is sinking, and I shall traverse old love's domain never again. So that's it, those are my 5 favourite poems. Please let me know down in the comments what your favourite poems are and if you have any poetry recommendations for me based on the poems I've just said that I really like. And that's it, thank you very much for watching, and I'll be back tomorrow to talk about my top 5 favourite plays.